John Hook's Newsmaker Saturday starts now.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker Saturday. Tonight, we are going to hear from both candidates for Secretary of State in Arizona, Democrat Adrian Fontes and Republican Mark Finchem. The Secretary of State is not only the chief elections officer, but also, in effect, the lieutenant governor, the next in line should the governor die, be removed from office, or resign. And by the way, in Arizona, this happens quite a bit. It's happened 5 times. 4 times in the last 40 years. The matchup of Fontes and Finchem has been described as a showdown between one of the strongest critics of the 2020 election, Mr. Finchem, and Mr. Fontes, who has said there was no significant fraud in the election in 2020. We will hear from Mr. Finchem later in the program, but we will begin with Adrian Fontes, an Arizona native, former Maricopa County recorder, a lawyer, a former prosecutor, and Marine Corps veteran. Adrian, good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, John.
Okay, there has to be a rationale to run. So why do you want this job?
Well, we've got to protect the republic from the extremists that have emerged, and we've got to have folks who are ready to do the job on day one. As you mentioned in your intro, I am the former Maricopa County recorder, and in 2020, I helped put together that bipartisan team that brought Maricopa County one of the best elections that we've had. As a matter of fact, as highly scrutinized as it is, turns out it's probably one of the best elections we've seen in American history, and that's provable. And we've got to make sure that we protect our institutions from instability, chaos, and unpredictability. That's what my opponent presents. That's bad for business. It's bad for the arts and sciences, medicine, law, education, across the board. We cannot have that wild-eyed extremism in these offices. We've got to have folks who are going to be fair, call balls and strikes, and be able to work in a bipartisan way. And that's the candidate that I present in myself to the voters of Arizona.
Do you think that there are some things that were learned from this intense scrutiny of this election? I'm talking about the 2020 election. Were there some things learned still from all of the examination that maybe are helpful going forward? And what would they be?
Well, absolutely, John. And I think anytime you do anything, if you're not learning from it, whether it was great or not so great, you're not paying attention. One of the things I think that's really important that people learn is that not everything that's called an audit is an audit. We heard from auditing professionals across the board who pilloried that exercise and really laid waste to the concept that was anything near an actual audit, much less a forensic audit, which is what some people are calling it.
This is a cyber ninjas audit. This is a cyber ninjas audit, right?
Yeah, and so, but insofar as election administrators are concerned, look, we got a really good chance to show yet again that hand counting ballots is less accurate than doing it with certified tabulation equipment. We learned that there are enormous amounts of logistical challenges that have to be faced. We learned that every clerk across every precinct, every marshal, every person who's working in all of the polls has a critical job, and every single one of them has to do it just right. And so when you're operating an election with literally thousands and thousands of people involved, as we did in Maricopa County, you got to cross every T and dot every I. And we've been doing something very close to that for a very, very long time in Arizona. And I think one of the most important things we learned is that we can have a high level of confidence in our elections, even with these conspiracy theories floating around that are really based in a lie.
You mentioned
that was a big deal.
You mentioned hand counting ballots. Your opponent, Mr. Finchem, and Kari Lake, who's running for governor, filed suit. As you know, it was tossed out. They wanted to stop the next election and bring in hand count for voting.
Yeah.
What can you describe, since you were the Maricopa County recorder for 4 years, what would that look like? If we were to go back to hand counting ballots, what would that look like?
Well, it wouldn't work. Let's just be honest. It would not work. And as much as we should have faith in one another, human error is far greater, shows a far greater error rate than hand counting certified equipment, as we do and as is done in just about every other jurisdiction in the United States that has, more than a dozen or two ballots out there. And particularly in Maricopa County, look, we're talking about over 2.5 million voters. And the county recorder's office that I came out of, Mr. Richer actually has made some comments about the cost the amount of time and the potential for inaccuracy being so broad and so far beyond the pale that it just would not make any sense. We've got a system that works. It is efficient. It is cost effective. And if we want to include a whole bunch of taxpayer waste based on a lie, let's not forget that. They're asking to do this based on a lie. Then we're making bad public policy decisions for no good reason.
Can you explain, by the way, the hand count just in the audit of the 2,000, or I guess it was 2.1 million in Maricopa County votes, that took 2 months. I mean,
and it was only 2 races. Yeah. Only 2 races. It took that long. Imagine the entire ballot and all of the judges on the back. Everybody knows there's 30 or 40 judges on the back of each one. So it's unrealistic.
Why has this fraudulent election, stealing the election, a thrown election, why has this stuff persisted, in your view?
Well, because somebody's making money off of it. I mean, it's just that simple. Look, even Mr. Finchem was selling bumper stickers, hashtag Stop the Steal last fall into his campaign. He was selling T-shirts for $45 a piece into some organization, but nobody knows where any of that money went. You might want to ask him on the show later. But the bottom line is, this is about money. It's about people bilking Americans across the country. 59% of his donors are from outside of Arizona, and it's because of Stop the Steal. It's because of this grift. And we just got to call a spade a spade.
Adrian, what would you say to people who, you know, they watch the campaign and just from a visceral level, they'd say, for instance, Joe Biden largely ran a campaign from his basement. You hear that over and over. And how is it possible that he ended up with more votes than Barack Obama in something that was a movement? Everybody could see it, they could feel it. What would you tell them in Arizona that would give them comfort that the election was on the up and up?
Well, I tell them the same thing that everybody else has been telling them, that elected Republicans have been telling them. The election was run by Republicans, Democrats, independents, and libertarians, your neighbors, your friends. Folks who come from the community are the ones who ran this election. And the bottom line is, Joe Biden got more votes. But this election is not about 2020. This election is about moving forward. Are we going to end mail-in voting, which is what Mr. Finchem wants? Are you going to be forced to stand in line, which is what Mr. Finchem wants? Or are you going to keep those safe and secure and convenient options like ballot by mail or vote in person if you want under a Fontes administration in the secretary's office? This election is not about 2020. It's about moving forward, and it's about what we're going to see in the future. And I think people are just sick and tired of 2020 at the end of the day, John.
Okay, let's go back to 2018, because you ran for re-election for Maricopa County Recorder this past cycle, and you got beat by Stephen Richer. It wasn't by much, 5,000 some odd votes. But you did get beat. And some would say that may have been a reflection of what happened in the 2018 primary when people showed up, voters showed up on Election Day. Some of the precincts weren't ready to go. This was really your first big test as county recorder. And then some of the sign-in procedures were not ready to roll.
Sure.
So, okay, you're not going to quarrel with any of that.
No, it happened. Look, we had a system that we were introducing some new processes into to try to improve what worked and what we knew could work. We had some missteps. I took responsibility. At the end of the day, that's what people want. They want leaders who are going to stand up and say, did we find a problem, identify how to fix it, and then fix it? Yeah, that's what we did. I'm not going to run away from my record. And, you know, what really is important isn't just what happened in that one election, in the primary in 2018, but what happened in that general, what happened in the following many, many elections since then. And now you have the same Stephen Richer who beat me singing the praises of the bipartisan system that I built in Maricopa County.
Let me just follow up,
supervisors doing the same thing.
Let me just follow up with that. So given the problems in 2018, now you're running for the state's top job of overseeing elections. Why should people give you that job if you may have eroded some of their confidence in 2018? Why should they give you the top job?
You couldn't have more stark difference between the two nominees for the parties. In me, you've got an attorney, a Marine Corps veteran, a CIRA certified election administrator, and a guy with on-the-job, hands-on experience running elections. It's not a perfect record, but it's a record in learning and making things better over time. That's what folks want, versus a guy like Mark Finchem. He's got his own 2018 problem when he introduced a bill to try to take the selection of U.S. senators away from voters and put it in the hands of the legislature. That's right. He doesn't want you voting for U.S. Senate. He wants the legislature to appoint. He did that in the spring of 2018, way before the big lie. And later on, he joined on the efforts to try to take presidential elections away from voters as well, letting the legislature try to overturn elections if they don't like the results.
I will ask him.
Finchem does not want you and your vote to count.
I'll ask him about that shortly because he's coming up later in the program. A couple more things, just quick takes because we've only got about 30 seconds. Sure. What's your position on voter ID laws here in Arizona? Should voters
Arizona has voter ID laws, and we should continue to do it for in-person voting and maintain a very secure mail-in system like we have.
What about proof of citizenship for voting? How do you feel about that?
I think proof of citizenship is the same thing. That's the state of the law in Arizona. We've got a great system for making sure that all eligible voters can vote. And I think we should integrate more systems in so that we can have more certainty in the eligibility of our citizen voters.
Finally, what defines this race to you?
Well, what defines this race is American democracy versus totalitarianism. It's that simple.
That's a strong word. That's a strong word.
I represent a fair fight. He wants to tell you who you should vote for, and he wants to make you stand in line. That's not the candidate you see in me.
Adrian Fontes, good to see you. It's been a while. Appreciate it.
Yep.
And best of luck, and we'll talk to you soon. And coming up next on Newsmaker Saturday, we're going to hear from the Republican candidate for Secretary of State, Mark Finchem. We're back in a minute on Newsmaker Saturday. Welcome back on Newsmaker Saturday. Tonight, the candidates for Arizona Secretary of State. We just heard from Democrat Adrian Fontes in the earlier part of the program. Now Republican Mark Finchem, 21 years in police and public safety and law enforcement in Michigan. Graduated summa cum laude from Grand Canyon University. A businessman, four-term state representative, and now candidate for Secretary of State, Mark Finchem. Mark, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me on, John. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Mark, why are you running? Why do you want the job?
Well, after November 30th of 2020, I noticed that we have some pretty significant systemic problems with votes outside of the law that have been counted. And since that time, over the months leading up to the Maricopa County audit, many of the things that I observed, while the media might claim that it was a perfect election, we know better. In fact, quite frankly, every election since I think George Washington, there's been some kind of a defect in the system. And one of my certifications is a Six Sigma process engineer. Elections are a process, and every process has defects. My goal is to make sure that simple things like we count all legal votes, that we hold people accountable for following the law, that we make it easy to vote but hard to cheat, that we secure elections. And election security is very different than election integrity. Election security means that's all about the system. And then, of course, I have not seen many referrals by the Secretary of State's office or by the county recorders for criminal acts that are violations of both state statute and the Elections Procedure Manual. So with my background, I think that I'm uniquely qualified, and I really looked around the landscape and did not see anybody with the qualifications that I've got to manage that office. So we decided that we're going to make a run of it.
Okay, so Mark, you have said repeatedly the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump. The hand recount by cyber ninjas in Maricopa County, did you believe that they did an okay job? I mean, they found, as you know, they concluded Joe Biden actually picked up 360 votes. When they counted these votes again, are you not comfortable with what they did?
Well, I think the Maricopa County audit showed us how not to do an audit. Now, keep in mind that I was in the House, not the Senate. The House did not have a hand in any of the audit procedures. So I don't know what the audit procedures were. What I do know is many of the things that have come out since the audit have given us pause to really question the systems. So, for example, we know that there are roughly 160,000 electronic ballot images that don't have an audit head stamp. Well, that's an automated process that's supposed to be created by Dominion machines counting ballots. And if a ballot is in the system and it doesn't have an audit head stamp, how did it get in the system? That question was never answered.
So the John Shadegg report on the Dominion machines, John Shadegg, former congressman, hired 3 security experts to look at all this stuff connected to the Dominion machines and found there were no problems with them. They were not connected to the internet. They were working properly, appropriately. You disagree with that?
Well, not only do I disagree with that, apparently the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors disagrees with it because they spent $3.5 million on more machines.
So this gets into this whole issue of whether your race with Adrian Fontes becomes a complete relitigation of the 2020 election. Are you comfortable going there? Do you think it needs to be done? And for the voters who say, we've got to move on, what would you say to them?
I think the issue is not relitigating 2020. That's going to be taken care of, I believe, in the halls of the legislature, the House and the Senate. And quite frankly, it's not an executive branch discussion, quite frankly. What I think we need to be focused on, and this is what my candidacy is based on, is just hold people accountable for following the law. That's not been done over the last 4 years, over the last 6 years, perhaps even longer. We've seen very few referrals of people election officials, who did not follow the law. And there's a reason, and maybe this is what makes me uniquely qualified. After 8 years in the legislature, I understand why the legislature passes laws. It's with the expectation that people will actually follow the law. So as your next Secretary of State, I plan to hold people accountable for following the law as written. Now, if something needs to be changed in the law, that is not something that is the responsibility of the Secretary of State, who's in the executive branch. That is something that the legislature needs to be called on to make any changes in law. That means potentially a special session. If there is some kind of thing that happens that is urgent to the point where it could alter the outcome of an election, well, then the legislature needs to take that up. That is not something that the executive branch should be doing.
So you would have, if you were Secretary of State in 2020, you would have held up this election. You would have tried to hold up the election.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of hypotheticals there. Here's my question. Did they follow the law? Now, we've got evidence that they didn't, but the question would be, did we have that evidence at the time we were called upon to certify the election? Now, I would remind everybody that for a state officer to sign off on a document that is based in fraud, or if they knew or should have known that there was fraud or irregularities or whatever the issue might be, to do that knowing or in a position that you knew or should have known, that's a Class 5 felony. So I think that the more important question is, let's make sure that we're following the law going into the election so that we don't have the kinds of things that we saw in a 10.5-hour testimony on November 30th, 2020.
Let me just ask you, I've got to push back a little bit on this because, you know, there have been so many allegations of fraud, but in reality, this thing has come before, 60-some courts, and many of them with Trump-appointed judges, and they just haven't proved it in court. Even, Corey Langhofer, the Trump attorney, he said a week after the election, when he was in court talking about Arizona, he said, the plaintiffs are not alleging fraud or that anyone is stealing the election. We're simply raising concerns about a limited number of cases involving good faith errors.
That's my problem. I don't believe they were good faith errors. There are things that we have observed in the system that cannot be answered. I have more questions today than I ever had before. But I want to correct you on something.
Go ahead.
This has not been litigated in 60 courtrooms. Quite frankly, the courts, and I've caught a lot of flack from my colleagues over this, the federal court system acted appropriately in saying that this is not a matter for the courts. This is a matter for the legislatures. Under the U.S. Constitution, the legislatures have plenary authority to make determinations on whether or not an election law has been followed. They actually have a prescribed remedy. There is case law for that. So for the federal courts to say, this is a political matter, this is not a legal matter, we refer this to the legislatures for action. That was actually the correct thing to do. And that is why you had the various states that were testifying on January 6th, it was brought to the well of the Senate. Arizona said, we have some serious problems with some of the irregularities in the election. Now, I don't use the term fraud very often because fraud is a specific intent crime. What we have are unexplained irregularities and votes that we know are outside of the law.
Let me question you on this. This is, and it rarely comes up. In a review of the election, it was shown that there were about 40,000 ballots that were almost exclusively voting for Republicans, where the voter left it blank for president. On the Republican side, I mean, if we're looking for where Mr. Trump might have lost this election, to me, that's the glaring number.
Well, since I haven't seen the ballots, I'm going to take your word for it. I don't think that you've deceived me. But that's 40,000 ballots out of how many hundreds of thousands, out of how many millions?
2.1 million in Maricopa County, but I mean, the margin of victory for Biden was about 11,000 votes in Arizona.
Well, I'm going to say the margin of difference. I don't know that it was a victory. I'm not willing to yield that for one reason. We have so many votes that are outside of the law. And that question has not been addressed yet.
Okay.
But I really don't want to relitigate.
Yeah, I know, and we've got limited time. Let me ask you this.
The place where we are having everyone follow the law. That's the issue.
Okay. What was learned from these audits that you think was valuable?
Number one, how not to do an audit. I think that we need to have, and I've talked with several secretaries of state around the country, we need to have a uniform definition of what a forensic audit includes. I think one of the things that we want to have is structure there, because you don't, as President Karen Fann said publicly, you don't just go find an election auditor in the yellow pages.
Yeah, no, that's right.
A very specific skill and group of skill sets.
And that's where Cyber Ninjas got dinged a lot on this. Let me go through a couple of quick things.
Sure.
Your take on presenting voter ID?
I think it's an absolute necessity.
How about proof of citizenship?
I think that's a necessity.
Early voting, you've been very critical, but I think in your record, you have voted early and used mail-in balloting yourself quite a bit.
I have until this past election. I just decided that, yeah, it might be convenient, but now that I know what I know about the release of information leading up to the actual election day, I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think mail-in ballots are a good idea. I mean, if we go all the way back to 2000 with the Baker-Carter Commission, they said right in their report, if you want to corrupt an election, adopt mail-in votes.
Yeah, they were suspicious of it a little bit whenever you separate the voter from their ballot. One more thing, Mark. Candidates get caricatured in elections. It happens every time. What is something you want to clear up to people watching tonight that you think has really been a mischaracterization of you?
I've been painted as a far-right extremist. Okay, hold on a second. That's fear. That's not fact. The fact is, I've dedicated my life to law enforcement and following the law as it's written. If it's not in the law books, then we've got a problem if it's just not illegal. Now, if that means that the legislature needs to take up a prohibition or an encouragement of a certain behavior, that's a legislative position. So my entire role in this, the thing that I want to set straight for every single voter, my position is everyone should follow the law as it's written. That's parties, candidates, supporters, even election officials. And if you can't do that, we probably need to have a conversation.
Mark Finchem, we appreciate you coming on the program. Best of luck in November. Thank you for the time.
Appreciate it.
Okay, Mark Finchem.